oh, hey, ho, hey, oh, hey, ho, hey, oh, hey, 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 oh, hey, ho, hey, oh, hey, ho, hey, oh, hey, 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 oh, hey, ho, hey, oh, hey, ho, hey, oh, hey, oh.
Let me just say that it's May 5, 2025, and we're in an audio booth at Makoche recording, Makoche Studios in Bismarck. Carole Barrett is our guest of honor. Courtney Yellowfat is here, and I'm Dennis Newman. What we have been interested in, what Courtney and Dave Swenson have been working on for several years now, are the Sitting Bull songs, actually the Densmore recordings, and which did not contain very many references to or songs about Sitting Bull. And so all of a sudden there's an understanding that there's been research work about that by yourself and Isaac Dog Eagle, and of course the work that was done by High Eagle and by Campbell Vestal, and we want to talk about that. That's the general subject here. So give us a little bit of a backgrounder about how it came to be that you and Isaac delved into this matter of Campbell's research and Sitting Bull songs, and actually went and did the research in Oklahoma.
I met Isaac when it was the 100th anniversary of Sitting Bull's death, actually. I worked with some people from the Standing Rock Reservation on a program at the North Dakota Heritage Center. And so I got to know Isaac, and he would come to my class sometimes and talk. When he was in town, he would sometimes stop by. And at one point in time when he had come and visited with my class, afterwards he asked me if I would be interested in helping him find out more information about his close relative, One Bull, who was a nephew of Sitting Bull's. And so I said yes, and he was aware of these Walter Stanley Campbell papers at the University of Oklahoma. It's part of their archives, and as a way to better understand his great-grandfather, One Bull. And we assumed that there were stories and other pieces of information in those documents that might not have made the book, that there was extra information that would give insights into One Bull. That was one thing. Also, ascertaining a better understanding of that relationship between Sitting Bull and One Bull. And so we were looking to do that, but just also to get some insights into some of the stories. Isaac was aware of the fact that Campbell had been to Standing Rock and had done research and was very close to One Bull. His mother did. His grandmother, rather, Cecilia One Bull Brown, was worked with Campbell to collect information, and she did a lot of interviews with her father, who was One Bull. And I think this is all getting very confusing with all these names. But anyway, Isaac was interested in finding out what he could about One Bull in particular, and that was his major focus. And so I said that I would assist him. I'd done a little bit of archival research at the State Historical Society in North Dakota. And Isaac, I believe, was the one that knew that there were the papers at the University of Oklahoma. I wasn't really tuned into that at the point in time. But we got a little bit of information. And then I wrote a grant to the Humanities Council on behalf of Isaac and myself so that we could travel to Oklahoma, because we had to use the archives in person. Nothing was online at that point in time.
You have a note, a typewritten note in your hand there from Isaac to you, outlining what it is that he would like you to do. Would you mind reading that?
I'm asking for your assistance in obtaining a grant to make the copies of the papers of Dr. George Campbell on Sitting Bull. The papers are at the University of Oklahoma in Norman. His work should give us a better understanding of the Hunkpapa band of the Lakota as well as Sitting Bull. I understand there are 2 boxes of untranslated and unpublished papers about Sitting Bull. I can translate these papers if they are readable. The papers have great potential to be used for the advancement of the Standing Rock members in education, personal well-being of individuals, social behavior, and so on. There is much history written, but none from the Lakota perspective. These papers should clarify many misconceptions and teachings in education institutions of our country. I do not know what costs will be included, mileage per diem, and so on. Your assistance will be greatly appreciated. Sincerely, Isaac.
He mentions a number of papers there. Is that what it turned out to be when you got there?
There were boxes of papers, many more than 2. A lot of the papers were written in Lakota. Some were translated, some were not. Some were written only in English. They were taken down by a field assistant who wrote them from what was being translated. There were old men in the Little Eagle area that Campbell was interviewing, and most of them had fought alongside Sitting Bull or were friends of his, and he interviewed them, and then they took notes. They also issued some questions that they asked them, and information was taken down in the Lakota language as well. But there were a lot of documents, handwritten, difficult to read. Some things were typed, but not a whole lot. So it was long. We had planned to stay there for 5 days. We thought that would really be the be-all and end-all of research, and it was we just touched the surface. But it was really fun being with Isaac in the reading room of the library. You have to stay there, and any copies that you want, a librarian has to make copies, and they issue them to you. It's a complicated little system. Nowadays, you can go online. It's a little bit easier. But I remember him reading some papers about Sitting Bull in his early days on the Standing Rock Reservation when he'd come back from his imprisonment after he came down from Canada. He was in prison for a bit of time. Sitting Bull had decided to take up farming, and one bull was talking about this in these papers. He was giving information about the types of chickens that they had. I remember they talked about having some Rhode Island red chickens and trying to raise crops and having an oxen and a few things like that, and how they weren't very savvy at farming, but they were trying to learn. And Isaac was sitting there. The document was in Lakota, and he was partially translating, but he was just laughing because it was just, the idea of the whole thing was just funny to him because it was such a different image of Sitting Bull, I think, too, because everybody always pushes the warrior image of him and maybe some of his contrary ideas about the United States government. So, I mean, it was fun. There were a lot of documents that were more serious and so on, but he just enjoyed every minute of it.
I think it really is just kind of like humanized who Sitting Bull was.
Yes.
You know, like you said, there's a picture painted amongst society about Sitting Bull. It's not inaccurate, but there's a lot more of that picture that's not shown. You know, that human side of him, the joking. We talk about this Lakota humor. Even in the worst of times, we'll find some humor in it. You know, and I always said that some of the best times I've ever had with family and friends were at somebody's wake or somebody's funeral.
Yes.
You know, it's
yeah.
supposed to be a sad time, but we're all sitting there laughing, eating, and having a good time, you know. And that was the same with Sitting Bull. And even with Isaac, you know, people seeing a certain side of him, especially if you didn't live on Standing Rock and you weren't around him a lot. But then all of us you were down there a lot. I was there, at Sitting Bull's Camp Sundance and other places. You've seen the human side of him. I mean, Isaac was a fantastic joker.
Yes.
I mean, he would play practical jokes on you, and, he liked to laugh.
He did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in that archival library, there weren't people sitting around laughing, and he had such a good time. And there was another time there was an interview with Francis Bullhead that one of the interpreters had set up, and it turned into a kind of a fracas, and the interpreter was upset, and he was writing to Campbell that this was, difficult, and one bull had come in and done all of this, interfered, and he said family members should talk about Sitting Bull, not these other people.
I wonder if that's because of the name Bullhead.
It is. Exactly.
Yeah, one of the Indian police agents.
One of the Indian police, yeah, and it was his son that was doing the interviewing, and there was quite a fracas, and Isaac was just slapping his leg and laughing, and he was really interested in that. But Campbell got stories like that when he was doing his field research on Sitting Bull. He acquired some interesting stories about the local community, as well as this transition to reservation, the difficulties with that a little bit, but also some of the funny things that happened. A lot of that didn't make the book because he had this image of Sitting Bull as a warrior, and that's what he was highlighting. So some of these other stories that are more humanizing and show his, at least, kind of initial idea that I'm going to try this out and see what it's like as far as living on the reservation and following what the agent wants us to do and that kind of thing.
I mean, we all want to hear about Superman, not Clark Kent, right?
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. That's exactly right.
Well, you get, in looking at these documents, you get a glimpse into a number of other figures, including all of those that you mentioned, those sources, but some other people who, in ways, help to facilitate and or block information about Sitting Bull and his character and his life. High Eagle, for example. Where does he sit in the knowledge and information that you began to find there?
Robert High Eagle was Papa. He was related to Sitting Bull in a distant kind of way, but as everything at Standing Rock, it was a complicated relationship because his uncle, Lone Man, was one of the policemen. And he's the one that they say shot Crowfoot. And he was there at the cabin as an Indian policeman that morning when Sitting Bull was killed. And he was a relative. And that's the sad story. I mean, that when I was reading those things and more of the relationships and that kind of thing that were going on, the sad thing about Sitting Bull's death was he was killed by relatives, and relatives went... some of his relatives were there as Indian police, and it's always made for a difficult situation. It's sad. But Robert High Eagle went to Hampton Institute in Virginia and was educated. He learned English, and he could write Lakota language. He taught himself to do that. And he became a translator for Frances Densmore when she was doing the Teton Sioux music and culture. And then he also became a translator and kind of a field researcher for Walter Stanley Campbell. And he did interviews. He was very, very fond of Sitting Bull. He had stories about him when he was a young boy. Sitting Bull used to tease him, but he also praised him for getting an education and learning English and working for his people and doing things for his people. So he had a fondness, and he very much enjoyed, it seems like, being around One Bull and White Bull and a lot of the old men. He was pretty well versed in the history of the area and so on, probably through his family. So he contributed a lot. He got a lot of the stories, too, that are these extra stories that show daily life, give insights into the culture as it was on the reservation, as it was before the reservation system was imposed, and so on. And so he was an important figure in all of the research.
So Robert Heigl wasn't just the translator.
He was definitely not.
He put his life into it. And,
yes, he did.
The conspiracy theorists amongst me thinks that maybe that was a grand scheme to send relative after relative, to further break down the family system and the camaraderie between families and friends at that time, And this was post Sitting Bull's death and post Wounded Knee Massacre. And on the reservation at that time, I think you still had a lot of chaos and confusion over our ways, you know, and fear of doing anything associated with the pipe or songs or anything like that. So, I mean, a lot of these men that put themselves out there, really deserve credit because they were going against the grain, really, It
was such a difficult time. Had to have been so confusing in a lot of ways that the Indian agent tells you one thing, and then you have Frances Densmore coming in asking you about all these traditional ways and taking stories down about a lot of really spiritual matters in her book, and relying on those people that had that knowledge and still practice those ways in large part, kind of more in secret maybe, but also then somebody like her also labels Sitting Bull as a recalcitrant and just talks about him in the most negative terms of Sitting Bull, especially in some of his family members. And yet she went right down into Sitting Bull's home area to collect the songs and so on. That's where she found the most knowledge and the most men that were willing to share that knowledge of the songs and so on.
I mean, the number one thing you do to make people submissive is their hero was Sitting Bull. Crazy Horse, Gall, Rain in the Face, Running Antelope, is to try to get somebody to discredit them. Unfortunately, a lot of families probably went down that rabbit hole to chase these stories that don't really exist, but then we have to think about it ourselves is that these are just men too. I mean, we tend to hold them so high like a pope or something, like they can't do wrong. No, there was probably mistakes that were made as well, and they would admit that, But yeah, so there was always that attempt to discredit people as well too. So
yeah, and they get stereotyped as these old traditionalists that have this mystical knowledge kind of thing, but that guided their everyday life, and they didn't live their lives perfectly, but I mean, that was their guidepost in doing that. Yeah, some of the research kind of skews for what it doesn't add, what it doesn't put in. Campbell was sort of guilty of that too, with the warrior image that he was so interested in. And subsequent biographies of Sitting Bull will use the Campbell papers, but they kind of discount it because they say it's oral history, it's oral knowledge. They don't even often credit it as being history, but it's the remembrances of old men. So therefore, it isn't reliable, whereas you go to military men and you ask them, and all of a sudden it's reliable. And military records are reliable because they're written. But Utley is definitely, he's written some material on wrote a biography of Sitting Bull. It was quite popular with historians and so on. And he pretty well discounts. He'll repeat some of Campbell's fieldwork when it's, fits his need, I guess. But he also discounts it quite a bit as sort of the ramblings of old men. And yet Campbell does have a story that's kind of interesting, that he wrote a letter to his wife, and he said that my research is going pretty well. She had stayed back in Oklahoma, and he said, my research is going pretty well, but he said, it takes a long time sometimes to get a story, because if I ask somebody to recount an event, if they're by themselves, they won't tell me. They make me go get 2 or 3 other men that were witnesses. And they will then tell the story, and then the other men will vouch for the fact that it's true. And that's very much a part of Lakota culture, to verify the truth and keep people honest, that sort of thing. And when Campbell recounts it, it's kind of amusing to him in a way and irritating at the same time, because it's taking time and he only has so much time at Standing Rock in a particular summer. You know, all of that tends to be discounted by Western educated historians, that this is not such reliable information because it's the musings of old men, or that it's in an oral form and, you know, they're remembering it and it's mythologized.
Even though it's cross-referenced between a couple of people, and it's a verifiable way of documenting.
They'll tell you if it's... There were some instances where it was written down that, you know, they were laughing at a claim or something like that and kind of said, well, maybe not so much. So, yeah, not often, but I mean that they were really... they were careful about it. It was sort of a sacred responsibility in some ways to tell these stories, to share these stories, to share information about their lives as warriors, as, you know, men living in a community, as people adjusting to a new society and way of life. And it's to see it kind of discredited is
it's tough to hear. Living on a reservation right now, and there's younger people than myself that depend on some of these stories, and I try to remember them from my mother and from my father, and I can only tell it how it was told to me, you know. And so you have these stories from these men, and I think it's kind of Lakota protocol. If you're going to tell something, you better have witnesses there that'll vouch for you and back you up. But then you have to think about it at the time. They're not going to tell you about how many cavalrymen they killed. You know, it's like, well, I'm going to spend the rest of my life in a jail, you know, which some of them probably had encounters with, you know. So,
right.
Yeah, so there's probably a certain amount that they had to hold back, you know.
Yeah, they told each other, and they knew, but it wasn't for public consumption, so to speak. And the other way is that the battle accounts of soldiers tended to be the head count of those killed, wounded, of their own, not of, like, there's, you know, they have no idea how many Native people were killed at the Little Bighorn, for instance, but and usually it's very minimal numbers, many soldiers. But for the Lakota people, too, there's more interest. I did some studies of Red Horse's account of his exploits on the field of the Little Bighorn. He fought in the Battle of the Little Bighorn, and he talks about what he saw, what happened to him, and it's not what happened overall, which is a lot of what military reports are about, these bird's eye views of things, which people didn't have, but what he saw and what he did in his narrow area, and he gave detail of that, but he was always pressured for more precise information and so on. And I know that one bull gave an account of what he did at the Little Bighorn, and it was like, what time was this? What, you know, practically what parallel were you on this map and that kind of thing. Campbell was really pressing a lot for his informants and for the people that were doing the field research for him, like Robert High Eagle. He was always in the letters. Find out where this was geographically, find out the date, precisely the date. And the dates are more contextual about other events that were happening at that time. It wasn't calendar dates that the Lakota people were keeping. Likewise, the geography is based on what the Lakota called a particular place, and that might even vary from band to band. So you don't have, you know, like Mandan, North Dakota. It had a different name.
Right.
Frances Densmore is revealed in these research documents, too.
A little bit, yeah.
And some of her role in this becomes of some interest. Was there a revelation that you found about her?
Campbell initially wrote her very early on when he had this idea to go to Standing Rock, even before he'd gone to Standing Rock. He wanted to go down there and interview people that had fought with Sitting Bull. He was pretty specific about that. And he wrote her because he said he knew she had gone down there and collected these songs. And he assured her that his research was, based on a biographical kind of information that he was looking for. But she gave him a little bit of advice, and she, right away in the first letter that I found that she wrote to, responded back to him. She indicated that she did not approve of his subject matter, meaning Sitting Bull, that she didn't think he was worthy of a biography or any sort of special research. And she suggested that there were other people in that community that would be more worthy of research. And she didn't mention any other names. Interestingly, when she said that she recommended that Campbell interview a priest at Fort Yates, Father Strassmeyer, about Sitting Bull, that he would be a good source of information, which I found interesting on numerous levels. She said there were old men down there that knew. And then she mentioned about her own songs that when she was collecting them, she was pretty much avoided songs that were attributed to Sitting Bull. She said when she collected the information, found this interesting, that the Sitting Bull's name came up a great deal because these men had been cohorts of his, had fought alongside of him, knew him, were relatives of his, and they would reference Sitting Bull, and they would sometimes say that he had a song about something or another, and she said that she just didn't record those because she had contact with former Indian agent James McLaughlin and his wife. She, in fact, was staying at their house during some of the time that she was collecting this information, and they told her that Sitting Bull was a real problem on the reservation. He was a trouble causer. He was very backwards, meaning that he wasn't accepting these civilization policies that were being pushed by the United States. So she pretty well avoided him. And again, it just wraps around to that idea is, I don't approve of your subject matter. She did recommend Robert High Eagle as being a capable interpreter, and she had used him quite a bit for interpretation of the songs and so on. And undoubtedly, some of the research, he would have had to have done a fair amount of research for her. That was basically the gist of the information from her. Campbell didn't maintain a contact with her that I could tell, but Robert High Eagle did make a comment that he had worked with Frances Densmore, but she didn't know anything about Indian music, was what he said, and was negative a little bit about that.
I'm kind of wondering if Frances Densmore had these thoughts about Sitting Bull before she came to Standing Rock, or so you think she had those thoughts of?
I think she did, because if you look back at that point in time, she was down, she published the book in 1910, I think, or 1911, and she was doing her research about a year or two before that. But the historic record of Sitting Bull at that time was that he had been very much opposed to federal Indian policy. He was a menace. He was up to no good. He was conniving. Nothing very positive that was out there publicly. And that's in part what Walter Stanley Campbell actually stated, is that he wanted to find out what was beneath all of these images of him. Even by the late 1920s, it seemed like there was a pretty negative image, and that he wanted to try to uncover that. And so I think that Densmore showed up with a negative image, and it was reinforced. Certainly, she in particular mentions Marie McLaughlin.
And I think I mentioned that while researching the songs, how I came in possession of these songs, and I had no idea that these existed. I did not know that yourself and Isaac went to Oklahoma. I worked in the tribal ed department at the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe. I was a Language and Culture Institute director. And we have this program called Wo'oyake. It's taking old documents and we translate them and we put them out there for use for teachers or students to learn the language. And my worker, who works extensively just on that website, brought this. Did you ever see this? You're a singer. And it was 25 songs of Sitting Bull. And I think I should have just called in to work the next 3 days because I was just going through that, you know. But I took it to elders, you know, older singers. Have you seen this? Well, they'll read the text of the song. Well, I know that song. And it's like, those songs are still out there, even though they probably weren't recorded. But those songs were carried through our generation through oral knowledge, you know, oral tradition. And lo and behold, I uncovered, I probably knew 4 of them myself because we used them before, you know?
Right.
But I didn't know it was attributed to Sitting Bull making that. So just doing research here and there and finding that these songs still existed. You know, they were just sung for something else, you know?
Yeah, it's so interesting the way that it's sort of helter-skelter, hit or miss sometimes like that, but it's such a treasure when you find that information and document like that.
Yeah.
It's.
I mean, a prime example last year, Cannonball Paul, family of John Grass, asked me to sing his song. I said, do I know his song? And yeah, you sang it here in, that's his song? I didn't know it was his personal song. So it's like, that family kept that knowledge, you know?
Yeah.
But as a singer, I thought this was just an honor song.
Yeah.
But it ended up being John Grass's song, you know? So it's like, now I know.
A lot of the songs do have a longer history that we don't think about until, you know, some awareness comes about. But there's a lot of things in Lakota culture, history, society that are there, and sometimes they're just bits of things and you don't make a connection until somebody helps you along, or family or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's fun. It's really fun once you make that connection. You know, man, I got something. Yes. You know, it's like, I found this song. And I think it's just singers that get really excited about it. You know, it's like, and I want to share it with everybody, and I want to tell, and I want to teach it to everybody. You know, so
Yeah.
But it's like what you said, though. Sometimes you have bits and pieces as part of a puzzle. Sometimes you have to create that other piece of the puzzle to make them fit. Some of the songs I researched with the 25 songs is like, okay, this sounds familiar, but it's changed throughout the 130 years since his death, 140 years since his death, you know? So I'll sing it the way it was written by Robert High Eagle, you know? Yeah.
Well, the one thing that this work, Courtney and Dave's work, came up against, and that was this mystery of why there were so few of these songs documented by Densmore. And it was your research, it was High Eagle's research, it was Vestal Campbell that revealed that, did it not, in black and white, in letters, in a letter, of where that influence came from. And that influence came from another character mentioned in this, McLaughlin, and Marie McLaughlin.
Yes, yeah.
Solid evidence, research evidence.
If Densmore came into this with a understanding of what she's been reading about Sitting Bull, you know, and then it kind of being reinforced by Marie McLaughlin, James McLaughlin, you know. So I think it was like a double whammy, you know, just stay away from this, you know.
Yeah. But the interesting thing is she's getting so much contrary information from all the men that are sharing songs with her and telling her, Sitting Bull sang some song. He has some songs about this as well, and she's not interested in it. And I mean, that's kind of a strike against her as an anthropologist.
Oh, exactly, yeah. Yeah.
But so be it.
A big oversight.
Yeah, but she intentionally didn't choose to collect it, and I was really struck with that because I thought, what valuable information you've lost. And I thought it was lost at the time when I saw some of the information where she said she just avoided it. And then I discovered that there were some songs that maybe at least some things were saved. But he's remembered as a prolific songmaker and a good singer is what people would say about him.
Well, it all comes back to McLaughlin's doorstep, doesn't it? Having started the negativity to try to diminish him in his own lifetime, and then after he dies, continuing on with these stories, denigrating his memory and trying to reduce him in his influence and his size. And Densmore had an opportunity to do something about that and didn't.
Yeah, she went along with the...
It took until Vestal came along to somebody that wanted to reverse this.
He stumbled on it, too, in a certain way. And Robert Heigl was the one that became interested in it. He was the one that tracked down people that he knew would remember some of the songs, and he's the one that collected the songs. And it was kind of additional work that he did. In the book... Sitting Bull Champion of the Sioux, which Campbell wrote, he does include a couple verses of the songs. He did tell Robert Heigl he wasn't interested in the musical notations. Like Densmore's book does contain musical notations. And so he recorded the songs, but the old men sang them to him, so he had the full benefit of the songs.
Nowadays, we talk about cancel culture. You say something wrong, we're canceling you. So, and put in words of nowadays, it's like Frances Densmore was the leader of the cancel culture.
Yes.
She canceled Sitting Bull.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that was, you had this idea of Sitting Bull, and his death was just 20 years before. There was this idea of... I guess, rekindling flames that they thought they extinguished.
Right. McLaughlin was somewhat sensitive, too, because he was very much in the background. The military was supposed to be in charge of the reservation in 1890 because of the Lakota reservations because of the ghost dance religion. And he very much pinned that on Sitting Bull as practicing the ghost dance and so on. Isaac and I got into that a little bit, trying to see what we could see as far as that goes, because family history says that he was somewhat distant from it. It did occur in his camp. He did let it go on, but that he wasn't a practitioner, whereas McLaughlin puts him right in the middle of the ghost dance and a practitioner and fomenting problems and so on. And so he was really putting out a lot of negative information about Sitting Bull, but he also was the architect of his death. He sent the Indian police down. He worked with the military that the Indian police would go in first, but there would be a backup of military men and so on. And afterwards, there was some criticism of Sitting Bull's death, and in the McLaughlin papers, which are at the State Historical Society in North Dakota, he spent his Christmas and New Year's and a couple of months beyond penning papers to any and everybody, writing articles for magazines that were popular at the time, talking about what a horrible person Sitting Bull was as a way to justify what had happened, because he was taking some criticism. I don't think it came from government officials, certainly, but he was definitely trying to cover himself for what had happened.
You would think about the ghost dance culture. Sitting Bull is such a... He was, through our history, is noted as a prolific singer and composer of songs. You would think if he was right in the middle of the ghost dance religion, ghost dance culture, that there would have been songs made that he made,
right.
But from all indication that was passed down through history is Sitting Bull permitted it to happen. But it's like, well, McLaughlin, you said there's no chiefs anymore, so,
Yeah.
even though they still looked at him as a chief and a leader, So you would think that there would be more history of him being involved with the ghost dance if he was really, truly involved with it. All accounts from history is that he was back here and he's seen it,
The eyewitness account happens to be McLaughlin's that he writes about in his book, My Friend the Indian. And he puts Sitting Bull as a chief practitioner of the ghost dance and right in the middle and so on. And there's just no other accounts of that really hold any water. He becomes a source for newspaper articles of the time and so on. He was quick to put out negative press and so on. And we've taken a lot of that history from McLaughlin, from what he wrote in his papers, and then transmitted to federal officials. I mean, he was writing telegrams immediately after it happened. He had sent one bull was doing freighting work. The native people would go up to Mandan in Bismarck and bring goods down to the Standing Rock Reservation, and one bull was a contractor, if you will, did some of that work, and he was intentionally sent up to Mandan to get freight and so on during the arrest attempt. So he wasn't there. His wife was there present. She did not get killed. She was an eyewitness to what happened. And then one bull and his family were held prisoner for a couple of months. That's something that you hardly ever hear about, that number of close family members that didn't go down to ultimately Pine Ridge were held captive for a couple months at Standing Rock Reservation.
One other idea that McLaughlin promoted was that Sitting Bull was a medicine man. Yeah. And I wonder if you might, the two of you might sort of flesh out some details about the distinction between this label as a medicine man and the role of a leader, of the supreme leader of the Sioux Nation or of the Hunkpapa people, a leader of the people, and as a deeply spiritual man. What's the distinction between the two that people should understand?
Well, I would say, weren't we all medicine men? Sitting Bull definitely had an altar, spiritual person. And we were taught, like, with that chanupa that they have, and there was a picture of it going around, anything, any power, if you believe in this way, that anything can happen, anything good can happen from this pipe, that chanupa. So they could have called anybody a medicine man back then, really. If I went and dug up a root and said, this helps with your toothache, and it took your toothache away, hell, he's a medicine man, So, I think, like, it goes back to that, there was negative propaganda put out there about Sitting Bull, about, and it's stuff still going on today. It's just the same old song and dance, So you're either a noble Indian or you're a warrior, or, you had to be put in one of these categories. So I think when they say medicine man, spiritual man, I believe Sitting Bull was all of these. He had an altar. He had what was everyday knowledge for a lot of people. Oh, you go get this root, you do this, you make this tea, So I think you could have called a lot of men and women medicine people back then.
McLaughlin was using it a little differently,
McLaughlin used it as a way to indicate that that Sitting Bull was, first of all, not Christian, that there was a policy of Christianization on the reservations during that time. And Sitting Bull talked to religious people, Christian religious people. They were living down around the area that he was on the reservation. You had the Congregationalists for one, and Catholics, but he didn't convert to any Christian religion, and so that was a strike against him. because they were looking to convert oftentimes the headmen or leaders of the people, with the idea then that if they converted to Christianity, then others in their family and others in their camp would also convert. So, I mean, there was that little piece going on, but it was essentially that he wasn't Christian, but they made it sound as if he really hated Christianity, was opposed to it, and that it was very superstitious and there was something evil about it. There was an evil intent with it, and that it was just something that needed to be eradicated. And it becomes kind of a way of saying that, again, he wasn't really anybody special. In fact, he was somebody dangerous, and taking him out was a good thing.
Performing black magic.
Yes, yes, exactly.
So they tried this trickle-down religion, basically, from the head person down, hoping that they would all be either, one of the Christian faiths, so I guess. And, then you read about how they did it. Oh, you guys are going to be Catholics, so you guys are going to be Congregationalists. You're Episcopal over here, and just went down the line. Wunbulin
eventually converted to Christianity. He was in the Congregationalist church, and but he also did all the other things. I mean, it wasn't like you convert to Christianity and you leave everything you ever knew behind you. That's what the idea was by the Indian agents and federal Indian policy, is conversion is this true turning away from those traditional Indian ways and the ways that you were taught as a child, the way that you lived your life. And so that idea of conversion was, that you've got this new life and you're a new person. But really on the reservation, what you see is this idea of you can become Christian. Many people did over time, but it didn't make them less Lakota, less knowledgeable about their ways. They understood these things as a whole, not as a separate, I'm a Christian, and then I'm going to go off and do this stuff in secret until a lot of things were outlawed, and then it did become a little bit more underground. Federal Indian policy began to ban religious practices, traditional religious practices.
It's almost like I'll practice Christianity during the day and I'll be Lakota at night, under the cover of night. Mm-hmm. And, we still have people like my father. He tells a story about him sitting on horseback with his cousins on different buttes around Kennel, South Dakota, while they performed a sweat lodge ceremony down below. And they were told, if anybody comes, you come down here, you get us, and we're out. And he remembers this as a child.
Yes.
And, so that was still prevalent back, even in the 50s,
Yeah, I remember talking to Dolores and Imogene Taken Alive, and their family was Episcopal, and they went to church and talked about all the things that they did at church and so on. But her grandparents, who were relatives of Sitting Bulls, did healing ceremonies and used sweat lodge and so on. And the girls knew about it, but their parents told them, don't ever, ever say anything, and don't say anything when we're at church. But they were also, their parents were very good Episcopalians, but also very good Lakota people. They didn't see the, these as being things that just didn't mesh. But the government drove a lot of it into sort of a secrecy, but it didn't go away.
What value do Campbell Vestal's papers at Oklahoma have yet today? Is this all known by everyone? I guess we know it's not, that the awareness ebbs and flows over time. What value do they have now?
Isaac and I did not plumb the depths, let me put it that way, of these papers. There's a lot of information. They've been used quite a bit by historians, but again, with a particular goal in mind. They go in with a goal, I think, ahead of time. So they just pick and choose what fits and then what doesn't fit, or they say that there isn't much value to them and they'll mention the papers. But there's a real value to them on multiple levels. Certainly the Lakota language is there, and that's precious in any sense of the word. And the stories being transcribed by Lakota people in their own language. And the translations are negligible in some ways, but it makes them usable in a classroom setting or something. But there's a lot of information and a lot of bits of cultural information that could be gleaned from these papers. So I think that there's a lot more that could be done, and they're interesting. It's fun to go through them. It's also difficult in some ways because a lot of it's in handwriting. Some of it's indistinct. I mean, I think it's really valuable, but it also takes a lot of time. And you get disparate pieces of information. You have to kind of keep track of things, and you can come together with a more broad picture.
I think with those, you got me fired up, Carole. Now it's like it was in my position at the tribe. Last year I was a Language Culture Institute director, and we use these documents in classroom settings, and we have, it's like a big Wikipedia page of documents. Now, my other position is the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, and I'm in those positions now where I can get those all back. Maybe not the actual copies,
right,
but the digital copies, because we already have done it with the Damali Parks collection.
Oh,
and
okay.
That's 500,000 pages of material, language material, history, songs, and that was all returned to the tribe now, too. So
excellent.
Well, the digital copies,
Yeah.
until we could get a place to properly store this stuff. But I think that the importance of that, the High Eagle documents, the 25 songs of Sitting Bull, is like, these songs were there. We just didn't know how to look for them. And we didn't know, like, certain songs were attributed to Sitting Bull making these. And I always found it interesting that, because just growing up and being around people like Isaac and Everett Jamerson and, Kevin Locke, and, they had this knowledge of one bull and Sitting Bull and White Bull, and it's like, and they all seen Sitting Bull as a singer. I mean, he was everything you think about it.
Yeah.
They called him medicine man, spiritual man. He was the only one elected or chosen by the people to be the leader. And he was a singer, and he practiced all these, he made songs. They always say he was a prolific singer, and he composed a lot of songs. But then as a singer, it's like, okay, I know this one song attributed to him. Or I know this other song, but where's the rest of them? And then we come across a document like this that just, as a singer, it's just like, wow, where's this been my whole life,
Yeah.
And once I thought I was done with Densmore stuff, and I just got fired up and talking to Dave Swenson here at Makoche, and say, we need to do something with these. We really do. I need to, I say, I can get in contact with older singers that I know that can help me through this. And I did. I reached out to here and there. Do you know this song? And there's always that spark in their eye. I know that song, So going back just to that stuff, but to bring some of these things out from the dark, dusty cabinets of some museum someplace is very important, because there was a reason why these people did this. There's a reason why they shared these stories, shared these songs, and shared this information with people, such as Densmore, such as Robert High Eagle, and so on. There's that reason why. And they, like I said before, I always use that analogy, is that there was just a spark left of our people, just a spark. They nearly extinguished it, but these grandmothers and grandfathers that saw the importance of future generations to have this, they had to keep that ember alive so that we can have this once again later on. It may just be a drop in the bucket of what we lost, but it's something. It's a lot better than a lot of other tribes have. I'll tell you that much. I mean, even though I do other things now, and yourself, you always consider yourself a teacher. Because
Oh, yeah, you never get away from
You
it.
never get away from it. I just trying to disseminate that information, even if it's just not to children, if it's to other adults.
It's obviously vital. I was really excited when we found this stuff, and there had always been some kind of stories about Kevin Locke had these songs or something like that, and I don't know if it was these or not. I mean, I was getting it really fourth and fifth hand, but when we came across the songs in the material that we looked at, and then beginning to use the songs, the themes that were in the songs, actually, if there were, songs about a Tunka, sacred rock, those things, and what did that mean? And High Eagle gave a little bit of context, but there were, going through the papers, you find a little bit more context, stories about these things or rituals where they were used and that kind of thing. So just the idea that when I found that, Isaac and I talked about that, and we kind of framed that piece of research that we did around the songs themselves and thematically, and explained it as best we could through the documents. But just the value of it, because so many people say that was then, this is now, this isn't relative now, and so on, and it's everything now. It's always been everything, and it's so important to have and to be able to pull that research together and to pull the songs together and that kind of thing. And the work that you and Courtney have done is just amazing. So important for people.
What was Isaac's reaction to everything that was learned then?
Oh, he was really excited about seeing this. And he had heard stories, heard bits of things, but to actually see some of these accounts that confirmed what he had been told, what he knew a little bit about, and so on. So even he was raised in a different generation, and he was born in the 30s, 1930s, but to be able to see this information confirming knowledge that he partially had, but he was also a victim of boarding school, of reservation policies, a whole lot of different things that, tried to take culture away, tried to take the language away, all of that. And so, he was really excited and really held those papers as precious.